Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much. Good morning to each of the committee members. Today is Saturday, January the 20th, I believe, and we are back at the Rules Committee with the sole purpose of making sure that Congress can move back to the floor with authorization. We were expected to be back for home recess, where we would go back and meet and work with our constituents and listen to their needs and be prepared. We find ourselves in Washington as a result of a shutdown that happened at midnight. I would say to each of you that the Republican proposal that was put on the floor that we passed extended government spending through February the 16th, 2008. It extended CHIP, which is Children's Health Insurance Programs and related programs, for 6 years, which is unheard of. It suspended the 2.3% medical device tax for 2 years, and it would not apply to any device sold in 2018 or 2019. It delayed for 2 years the excise tax that Obamacare also put on each family, in particular the Cadillac tax, and we extended that not to take effect until 2022. This impacts many union families who have very, very nice and earned health care coverage. We're not going to tax that. And it suspended the excise tax on health insurance for calendar year 2019, which meant the about $70 a family that was on their own insurance plan, the Democrats and Mr. Obama had in law to tax every family even more. Republicans passed this on the floor. It went to the United States Senate, did not gain enough votes, and so the government last night at midnight was shut down. So last night, Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats made the decision to shut down the United States government, to vote against the bill that funded our military and paid the men and women in uniform. They voted against the bill that it would extend children's health insurance for 6 years. And not because I don't think they opposed anything in the bill, because you'd be hard-pressed to find anything that was in the bill. Republicans and I believe Democrats alike saw the need in the legislation. They voted against the bill to manufacture a crisis and purely political move, I believe, that is unrelated to any issue except bitterness toward the President of the United States.
Mr. Chairman?
I'll give the gentleman plenty of time. I'd like to thank the 5 Senate Democrats and the 6 House Democrats who voted to keep the government open and to fund each of these items, including the government. As President Trump said last evening, Senate Democrats own this Schumer shutdown. I believe they put politics above national security, military families, and our country's ability to serve all Americans. I ask my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this new rule, which will provide same-day authority through January the 29th and suspension authority through January the 28th, providing the House with the flexibility to reopen the government and to fund our government with any measure that is brought, whether by the Senate or the House, so that we are prepared and ready to go. The United States military, I believe, deserves what we do. Last point, I think every person, Republican and Democrat, on this Rules Committee has an opinion and has expressed themselves with a confidence, including the gentleman, Mr. Polis, who last week, when I asked him point blank, do you believe that the House, the Senate, and the White House are effectively meeting and moving forth to a plan? We don't know what it is. And he said, yes. I will tell you that I believe that we are doing that. I believe the President rightfully pushed the United States Congress and the American people towards resolution of this issue. I believe resolution of the issue of a policy matter should, however, take the form, as the gentleman from Sunnyside, Washington, Mr. Newhouse, has noted, should include the signature of the President. So it does mean that we would have to see the correct bill, understand it, let the American people know what's in it, in the House, the Senate, and then have the president sign it. That has not yet even been close. Concepts and ideas have been floated, have been agreed to. The most important thing we can do is to fund the government. This was an obligation that we had October 1st of last year. We have found a way to evade doing our job and trying to work with each other. The government is now shut down, and it's time for real leadership and real action. It is my hope my party will offer a plan that simply funds the government, we come to some agreement, and then turn our attention to doing what we said we would do, and that is an immigration plan that the American people know and understand, that the members can go back and articulate their positions, and we expect to be in the Rules Committee in March to handle that single issue. That is what I have believed we were going to do for months, but today is about making sure we simply have the ability to move our ideas on the floor, whatever those ideas might be. Now, with that said, every member of this committee has an opinion, and I thank you for allowing me to give mine. The gentlewoman is recognized.
I would like to give mine. In the first place, it's not that we shut down the House. The voters last night in the Senate did that. I recognize that you got 5 Democrat votes, but I believe we got 5 Republican votes. So it was a bipartisan vote. Chuck Schumer did not do that. As I've said here a couple days ago, and couldn't be even stronger today, our fingerprints were not on that CR. We had no idea until we were ready to come to rules what you even had written down. And no, it is not good. We are not happy with what you did to the health care bill, not a bit. We made it perfectly clear, our leader did, in every conversation she had, what you needed to get our votes. But it simply didn't matter until we got to the floor. And then all of a sudden, all we heard was, please do something here and this chip, which we made very plain as well. Chip was critically important to us, but we wanted a longer term or a maybe permanent chip, similar to what you did for corporate tax cuts. We thought that the health of the children of the United States was as important as that. And as far as, I must take umbrage with my colleague Polis if he thinks that they were all working together. I heard Senator McConnell, myself, with my very own ears, say if he knew what the president wanted, he'd do it. And it's been almost difficult to impossible, I would think. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it in my life. That the things the president said, we all heard him say, show me something, I'll take the heat and I'll sign it. Well, hardly. Dick Durbin was at our caucus again this morning, and nobody doubted it, but he reinforced what he had said about the conversation that he had with the president. We don't know where he is. We have a feeling he would like to get to Mar-a-Lago and do his $100,000 dinner tonight, and he may go, for all I know. But what I would certainly plead with you, it's not the matter of timing, how many days it is, it's what's in it. And for goodness sake, let us in on this. We were sent down here to help, not to hinder. We have offered our support and help in getting the CR done. I hope we can get something done by Monday. I don't want to see federal workers going without pay and all the shutdown. Let me tell you some of the things we're losing here. Progress on reducing the massive backlog of veterans' disability claims. That's stopped. 2/3 of the Centers for Disease Control and 3/4 of the National Institutes of Health furloughed. And I'm very fond of saying in the last one that we had 5 Nobel laureates working for the United States government, and 4 of them were furloughed. Flu season, surveillance, and monitoring severely limited, and this may be the most serious year. I know that 20 children have already died of flu. Life-saving FDA food safety inspections were delayed. That is really scary. 1.2 million private sector loans to individuals and small business were disrupted. The Department of Transportation cannot give out its grants, and that work cannot go on. Billions in tax refund were delayed. Head Start centers serving 6,300 children were closed. 120,000 private sector jobs destroyed. So why is it shut down today? because in your wisdom, you wrote something that benefited you greatly, and that we said all along that we could not support, but made suggestions on what we could do to be able to make us be able to support it. And strangely enough, I think about 70% of the American people agree with us. Knowing that, it doesn't make a bit of sense to me that this weekend, the two sides, the Democrats' leadership and the Republican leadership, cannot together to solve this problem. Certainly they have the mental ability to do it. I think they simply lack the will. But in the meantime, there is no doubt about it. I'll say it again, our fingerprints are not on that CR. We had nothing to do with it except to vote. And I think we certainly gave everybody the foreknowledge that that is what would happen. The fact that you couldn't get your own votes over in the Senate, but I appreciate that was difficult over there with a majority of one. So we find ourselves here today. I think all of us, I've not heard a single Democrat, including almost everyone that was at the caucus this morning, really wanting to work together to get something done here. So please, let's do it. But you know, talking about if we do it now, that sometime in March, you might vote on DACA. Why would we believe that? We've been hearing that since September. Never happened. And I don't see any reason, as I understand it, the Speaker called over to the Senate last night to say no deal on DACA. I don't believe your base will stand for it. And we would be, I think we would say we haven't learned a thing in the world if we were to believe that between now and March, you'd take care of that. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. And Louise, I do appreciate and respect your ideas. Chairman Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a great deal of respect for the ranking member and frankly, everybody on this panel on both sides of the aisle. But I think my friend actually made the case as to why we shouldn't be shutting down the government. Because you listed off all the bad things that are happening right now. Well, that's exactly what's happened. The United States Senate voted. I allowed the gentlelady to have her time. I'd be more than happy to engage after I have a chance to make my statement. But the reality is the United States Senate did vote to shut down. And frankly, almost all my friends on their side of the aisle voted to shut down. We just had enough votes in our chamber to prevail. Under their rules, and by the way, you know, more people voted to keep the government open than shut it down last night. And there were Democrats on both sides of the issue, just as there were Republicans on both sides, but Democrats predominantly voted to shut down the government in the House. They predominantly voted to shut down the government in the United States Senate, and under their rules, they have the ability to do that. That's fine if that's what you want to do, but nothing good will come out of this. And I can tell you that as somebody that was critical of my side when they tried to do exactly the same thing. It won't work. The president has already said he won't negotiate until the government's reopened. I think about any president would say something like that of either side of the party. You don't negotiate with a political gun, but to somebody's head. But you know, I like many people on this panel, I too have lots of federal workers. I have over 20,000 civilian defense workers in my district. And they keep planes flying for warfighters who are at war right now. They keep Patriot missiles and THAAD batteries serviced and in the field. They do the training for the field artillery. And I think they're probably having a pretty hard time understanding today why they're deployed in the field and might not get paid because we, you know, don't get our job done here. There was nothing in the bill that was offered and passed by the House and offered in the Senate that any Democrat had any objection to. Nothing in there. We all want to reauthorize CHIP. And saying, I want to make it permanent, that's fair enough, but 6 years, which was longer than the original request, is a pretty good deal. Making sure the taxes don't go up on Americans who happen to have good health care plans or, frankly, who happen to need medical devices is a pretty good thing. Making sure in a time when we've got the North Koreans rattling sabers that we give the Pentagon what it thinks it needs in missile defense is a smart thing to do. But I just think this tactic never works. I've argued that on my side, but you're basically doing what, frankly, was done in the middle 1990s and in 2013. And we can argue about this or that, but I bet you it plays out about the same. But the losers here are the American people. And I just hate it when either side, and both sides have done it, I'm not trying to be partisan, right? Either side uses this tactic because it's destructive, it's unfair, and I have yet to see it yield the desired result of whoever used it. This never seems to work out that way. Maybe this will be different, but I suspect not. And in the meantime, whatever gain there is, they'll be lost by the American people. There'll be all these various things that my good friend laid out will indeed happen if this rolls on long. So I do join her in the hope that we get this done this weekend. I would be delighted to do that. But I don't think it's, I don't know how you could achieve the legislative objectives that Senator Schumer laid out last night in 48 hours. I mean, there's no legislation written to do that. And it'd have to go through both chambers. So at some point, people will have to decide whether or not they want to reopen the government, which is in the best interest of the American people, and continue negotiating on other issues that, however important, don't affect every single person in America in the way that shutting down the government will affect every single person in America. And that don't undercut our military forces in conflict zones in the way that this will undercut them. So again, I know my friends are sincere in their belief. I respect that. Are they fighting for this principles? My advice would be, and it was the same advice I gave my own colleagues in 2013 when I was here, it's the wrong way to do it, and it won't get you where you want to go. And I sincerely believe that. So with all due respect to all concerned, and I do, these are my colleagues and my friends and people I have enormous respect for. But I think it's a sad thing when any of us, for whatever reason, shut down the government, because I don't see how in the world it heals the body politic. I don't see how in the world it serves the American people, and there are an enormous number of adverse consequences that begin to flow from it, and I think they began to flow last night. So that, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the gentleman's comments. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is day one of the Trump shutdown. And it is a sad day for this institution, and it is a sad day for this country. I think it demonstrates the incompetence of the leadership here in the House and in the Senate, and certainly in the White House. The Republicans control the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House. I think this is the first time in history where one party has controlled everything, where we've had shutdowns. And there was an easy way to avoid all this, and that is going back to regular order and basically approaching some of these spending issues in a bipartisan way. I mean, the notion that spending bills or continuing resolutions, that are written in the back room somewhere, where Republicans talk to Republicans, then they unveil it and expect Democrats to carry the day, is just ludicrous. If you want Democratic votes, then some of our values have to be taken into consideration. It is that simple. And if you don't want Democratic votes, then you can continue to do what you've been doing on not only this, but almost every piece of legislation of any importance, and that is, it's my way or the highway, take it or leave it. And that's not the way you get people to come together. It appears to me that the leadership of this House and the Senate aren't interested in bipartisanship, certainly not the White House either. And I think maybe Donald Trump, likes this chaos. He said several months ago that what this country needs is a good shutdown. I strongly disagree with him. I think that demonstrates an ignorance of what a shutdown does to this country. And then, and by his own words, he's the one who's to blame. I'm recalling an interview in 2011 with Meredith Vieira. She asked him, so if there were a partial shutdown of government come Friday, that would be okay with you? Trump's response, in my opinion, I hear that the Democrats are going to be blamed and the Republicans are going to be blamed. I actually think the president would be blamed. If there is a shutdown, and it's not going to be a horrible shutdown because, as you know, things will sort of keep going. If there is a shutdown, I think it would be tremendously negative mark on the President of the United States, because he is the one that has to get people together. We have a president that can't keep his word. We have a president who promises something at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then at noon has a whole different idea of what to do. And so here we are in this mess. But I'm going to tell you, if you want to get out of this mess and you want Democrats to be supportive, I mean, consult us. Listen to what some of us have to say. A little respect, because we represent just as many people as you do. In fact, if you look at the overall votes in this country, I think Democrats got more votes than Republicans did. not only in the presidential election, but also in the congressional races. I mean, that's it. But this is so. This does such damage to this country, and I want to. Maybe somebody could explain this to me. I was told that last night in the Senate, I think Senator McCaskill made a unanimous consent request that, as we're going through this chaos here today, that every member of our military get paid. That, in fact, there be no disruption in the support for our men and women who are serving our country. And I was told that the Republicans, specifically the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, objected. Now, I don't know what the hell he's thinking, but, I mean, the fact that that was a radical idea, or that was something that, would be bad, is beyond me. But I mean, maybe somebody can do a unanimous consent request again today in the Senate, and if we have the opportunity, if we could do something else. But the bottom line is, if in fact, people are worried about the Trump shutdown negatively impacting our men and women in the military, I mean, it would seem to me that that would be something we can do. I mean, what we should do is pass a long-term bill that funds our military and that funds our domestic priorities for a year, not by a few weeks at a time. But short of that, I mean, I would hope that maybe my friends here could convince some of their friends over in the Senate to maybe rethink that and accept that unanimous consent request. And with that, I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. The gentleman from the great state of Georgia, the gentleman, Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard my friend from Massachusetts say, I just wish some of my values had been taken into consideration in this bill. I wish, because we have so many legitimate things to argue about and be frustrated with folks about, we didn't introduce things that we actually are not frustrated with one another about. This continuing resolution, which the House passed, funded all of the priorities that we passed in a collaborative way last year. This continuing resolution that the House passed prevented the Cadillac tax from going into effect on workers that we both have in our districts. And we're all pleased that we're not putting families under that new burden. This continuing resolution that passed solved the children's health insurance program that many of our Democratic governors are facing and our Republican governors are facing. Even though the original extension was for 5 years, this was a 6-year extension to the program that we all wanted. This was the measure that came out, Mr. Chairman, to bring people together, and it was an opportunity to continue the conversation on immigration as well. Do we have a House-wide or Senate-wide or country-wide agreement on immigration? We don't. And there's not a thing that we're going to do in terms of a Schumer shutdown that's going to change that. Certainly not for the positive. We could do something in a Schumer shutdown that changes that for the negative. I don't want to understate the ability for there to be bad outcomes from a Schumer shutdown. But there's nothing that we're going to do in that effort that's going to advance the cause of bringing the country together on immigration. What we could do is come together on kids, as the House did. What we could do is come together on spending priorities, as the House did. What we could do is come together on men and women in the military, as the House did. It was painful to watch that Senate conversation last night, Mr. Chairman, and it's my great hope, and in fact, it's my great expectation that Senator Schumer just got his troops whipped into a frenzy, and it just went too far. And it was just too difficult to dial it back, and now in the sober light of day, folks are thinking, my goodness, what have I done? This is not what I intended for the United States of America. I don't believe it's what Senator Schumer thinks is best for the United States of America. And we have an opportunity today to have the Senate pass that bill again, preventing so much of the harm that every single member of this panel knows will come. with that expression of that hope and in fact expectation, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, the distinguished gentleman, the young judge from Florida. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My good friend from Georgia just characterized the shutdown as the Schumer shutdown. My good friend from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, characterized it as the Trump shutdown. My good friend from Georgia just said that Schumer got his troops worked into a frenzy. I know Chuck Schumer, served with him here in the House before he was a United States Senator. I know 60 of the United States Senators personally, some of them better than others, at least 35 of them that served in the House of Representatives. What I do know about all 100 of the members of the other body is that they have their own reckonings with the states that they serve and are not likely on either side to be whipped into any frenzy by either Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell. They're independent thinkers with independent responsibilities and the ability to go forward with reference to their respective ideologies and the things that motivate their constituencies. I say to my good friend from Georgia, it's not what you had in the CR. It's what you did not have in the CR that motivates me. And none of us are incapable of messaging from the point of view that we want all things to be. But what has happened here is that one whole segment of the representatives of the United States in the House of Representatives have had absolutely no input at all to the particulars of the continuing resolution. Now, that's just not right. And it's not right when Democrats do not include Republicans when they're in the majority, and it's not right that Republicans don't include Democrats when they're in the majority. I've seen 25 years of this activity, and what we're going to do for a few days is we're going to go forward with trying to blame each other. The truth of the matter is we give good reason to the people in our respective constituencies to not throw blame at each other, but rather to accept shame for us not doing the things that are required in order to satisfy all of America. My friends, if this closing of the government lasts for a week, it will cost $6.5 billion a week. $6.5 billion. Assuming that that's hyperbole and that it's only $5 billion. Most of us don't have any direct way of calculating. I notice most of the discussion starts with the park services. But it's people that are going to be affected. It's moms and pops and children that are going to be affected. It's not just government workers, it's Social Security recipients are going to be affected, and the workers who provide the Social Security funding are going to be affected. I think there is a distinction. All of us profess to care about people, but I do believe Democrats have demonstrably shown that they care about people. And let's get the business straight about the military. Secretary Mattis sent a 2-paragraph letter for the edification of all of the United States military. In the body of that statement, he said that the planes will fly and that the ships will sail. And he asked the troops to stay steady and to stay alert. And they're going to do that. And playing on the business of we're not taking care of the military because the government is shut down, that won't fly. We know that we are going to do what's right by them. The business of the Democrats are doing this because of DACA. I didn't vote against this thing the other day just because of the condition that we find ourselves in by not doing the right thing by the Deferred Action Children's Program. I voted because we didn't include money for opioids. I voted because the Senate, where you say Chuck Schumer has his troop whips in a frenzy and McConnell says that it's a Schumer shutdown, I voted because we passed an $81 billion disaster fund relief measure here, and it got stuck over there in the Senate somewhere rather than them last night, and I stayed up and watched them until 1:30 this morning. Rather than dealing with that particular issue, they're going back and forth in little clutches and clutches, trying to come up with some understanding with reference to DACA. Please know this, the DACA people, the young folk, between the ages up to 34 that are in that program, they're in that program of no reason other than they were given an opportunity by President Obama to come forward and declare themselves, and that gave them an opportunity then to get a driver's license, to go to work, and to pay taxes. By virtue of us not doing anything, and that's what was not in the CR, by virtue of what we did by not doing anything, 120 of them each day will lose their status. And even if it is true that we would have until March the 5th or 8th or whatever it is, 120 times however many days that is a significant number of people who are left in the lurch and are left with confusion. So any one of you in here, Democrat or Republican, tell me what it is that Donald John Trump wants. You tell me what he wants. He wants a wall. We know he wants a wall. We believe that he believes that there should be some kind of sensible approach to immigration. We know that he takes credit for work that you did on tax cuts, which all the years before I ever knew Donald Trump's name, Republicans have been here advocating for tax cuts, and that is your right and your prerogative. But I strongly suggest to you that all of us should be ashamed of the position that we've allowed ourselves to be in. So if we calculate $6.5 billion a week, come midnight tonight, we will have spent $1 billion on foolishness. We can do better than this. We are better people than this. $1 billion would do an awful lot toward helping people with mudslides in California or in Houston or in Louisiana or in my state, or toward receiving relief from ongoing disasters. And all this business about a wall and Mexico is going to pay for it, everybody in here knows that's pure unadulterated balderdash. It ain't going to happen that way. So now you're in your 4th CR. When we come back here February 8th, and that's the date that they're floating around that everybody says that they will agree to, when we come back here, we'll be talking about the same things, but we won't have talked about the opioid crisis or solved it. We won't have talked about the impending influenza disaster that is affecting 20 children, and somewhere at the Center for Disease Control, where they are about the business of trying to do something to avert the problems of this influenza, which only covers about 30%, even if you receive the shot, That person is not going to work today unless he or she is declared essential. And I don't understand essential versus non-essential. Everybody in this government, everybody in this country is essential. And somehow or another, we all know that. And we all understand that. And yet we go back and forth with these political games. It can be designated as our shutdown. People look at us as their leaders. And if we don't do something about it ourselves, then how can we expect that it's going to wear a label or that it's going to wear a political ideology down the line? We have people that have pension problems in this country, and everybody claims they want to do something about jobs. And nothing is being done in this CR about that. We have the potential going on down the line for serious cybersecurity problems. Nothing is being done about that. We have people that don't want to address the fact that our elections are being meddled with, and we're politicizing that rather than dealing with it in a realistic fashion. Now, I don't have great respect for Donald John Trump, largely because of his actions, not because of anything that he has in his mind about what is good for this country. I don't think he knows what it is to legislate. I don't think he knows what it is that we do when we legislate. I don't think his meetings with Schumer or with Nancy Pelosi or with McConnell or with Cornyn, when they leave out of those meetings, I think that they can look at him and clearly understand that he didn't know one thing about what was going on other than simplistic conclusions about his ideas about how the government ought to run. He may very well have his base. Any one of us has our base. But a base is not what America is. America is an idea with ideals and values that do not exclude people, but that include people. So what you've done, my friends, is you've twisted yourself in a knot by simply excluding the people that could help us do this together. The simple fact of the matter is we had the most closed rules in the history of the Rules Committee, which means that people were shut out before the shutdown. You continue down that path, and all of us, and I say to my Democratic friends, very often when they are looking around and talking about a wave, I've seen, and some of you have observed, as have I, a throw the bombs out movement. And we could all get entwined in that. But I'm prepared to stand the test, saying that this CR should have included opioid money and pension money, and that we should have shaken loose the disaster relief money. I'm here, just as you, just as strong on the military as anybody in here. And all of you have that same idea. Our military is going to be all right, but let's don't make these wedge issues be the defining premises that we operate on. I'll stop now, Mr. Chairman, but not because I want to. It's just that there are other people that should have an opportunity to vent. But when you vent without identifying that this is a blame game. This is a shame game. And all of us ought to be ashamed, period. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. I would remind all of us that, in fact, what we're here to do is to do exactly as Judge Hastings has done, and that is to express their opinion. I've always believed, since the day when I came on this committee, that people should be allowed to express their opinions, and I respect everybody with a chance to do that. I'm going to thank Judge Hastings for his comments. We would now yield to the gentleman, distinguished gentleman, Dr. Michael Burgess from Louisville, Texas. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And once again, when the House of Representatives, well, through both good times and bad times, the House looks to the House Rules Committee to provide that North Star or guiding light as we get through difficulties that are presented to us. I have a number of things that I wish to say, but I'd like first to yield a few minutes of my time to Mr. Woodall because some comments were made directly to him.
Yeah, I thank my friend for yielding. I often look to my friends on the other side for their passion and their conviction, and that's what we heard from our friend from Florida. But when I talk about folks getting whipped into a frenzy, I talk about exactly the kind of comments that my friend Mr. Hastings just made. He spoke sincerely about his concern about 120 young people a day losing their status under DACA. And that has been a rallying cry from the day that President Trump made his announcement about DACA. But as everybody who follows that issue knows, the courts spoke to that. And starting last Saturday, every single renewal application is now open for submission to USCIS. Once again, that was a rallying cry for urgency that we heard day after day after day, and it's now been addressed. It's not the issue to do nothing today on all the other issues because you're worried about that. You were worried about that last Friday, last Saturday. Those applications began to be accepted again. I don't dispute a thing that my friend from Florida said about everything that was not in the bill. I don't disagree with a thing that he said about who we are as a people and what it is that folks expect from us. But if you go back to America's early beginnings, you can often find wisdom in what those men and women had to say. And Edmund Burke at that time said, "No man makes a greater mistake than he who does nothing, because he could only do a little." We agreed on a lot, and we could do that a lot. But for whatever reasons you'd like to ascribe, folks have chosen to do nothing instead of make those things the law of the land. I think they're going to come to regret it, but that's the decision that's been made today, and I thank my friend for yielding to me.
And my friend is very welcome. Mr. Chairman, because the number of people who have not voted is very small, I am going to ask the committee's permission to suspend my time, go vote, and reclaim my time when I return. Is that permissible? Thank you.
Hi, so thank you for the time. The government is shut down, unfortunately. I was, like many, was disappointed that President Trump chose to shut down the government instead of just moving forward with apparently what he had agreed to with Republican and Democratic senators. Obviously, it will remain shut until President Trump chooses to open it. I do see one path forward that I'll be offering an amendment on. I saw a statement from Senator Graham that said he believes there's support for a continuing resolution that would fund the government through February 8th if there was an agreement to move to the immigration debate with an open amendment process. That's from a statement from him. So I have an amendment I'll be offering that will provide for consideration of H.R. 3440, the DREAM Act, under an open rule with 3 hours of debate. And I just want to talk about what that means. So open rule means we're not bound by the text of the bill. We go to the floor with the bill, but any Republican or Democrat, we can hash out our differences and demand votes through an open process. That's how this body's supposed to work. It's not supposed to just be backroom deals that, come out and we vote yes or no on. We're supposed to be able to, as legislators, work our will. And I know there's going to be some amendments proposed by members that I don't like. There will probably be some that I like. That's how we get our body to a place where immigration is not as divisive as it is now. I think there's a broad consensus to be had on a lot of these aspects of what to do with de facto Americans who've grown up here, who are as American as you or I, American in every way except for in law, and let members propose their ideas. So, that would, I think, help provide a way to unstick this. The outcome is the outcome. I don't think any Democrat here is saying that we demand we get our way on it. We just want the legislative bodies to work their will. I'm confident a majority of people are willing to work on this, Republicans and Democrats. So, rather than hold it back artificially, my amendment to the rule would allow us to move forward. I don't see what else we're doing with our floor time. There's this one, we're going to vote on this rule, and what are you doing? Just sending us all home at 4 or 5 p.m.? We could get this done 5 to 8 p.m. tonight, vote on it. You know, and if we can't pass it, at least we tried. But I don't understand what else we expect to be doing between 5 and 8 p.m. or even tomorrow with a government closure than trying to hash out these issues on the floor of the House. So I think it's a great amendment. I'll be offering that shortly. As has, been said by many others here, it's unfortunate that President Trump has chosen to have a government shutdown in his first year in office. It jeopardizes our national defense, makes us less safe from terrorism, hurts important services to American people. There's still time to stop most of that harm. I think it's my understanding that most of that starts on a Monday. I think that we should ratchet up the pressure on Congress to simply reopen government. Even if, we're close on the negotiations, why not do a 3 or 4 day extension to give Congress the time to address all the open issues like spending caps, children's health insurance, all these massive spending increases Republicans want that'll increase the deficit. I mean, all that can be figured out, but we should do it while government is open. There's no particular reason to hash out those differences while government is closed. I can't think of any advantage to that. Maybe it provides a political cover for Republicans, I don't know, to say they're trying to reopen a government closure after they close it. I don't know. But as a member of Congress, it certainly doesn't affect my willingness to negotiate. I can negotiate the same way whether government's open or closed. So I don't see why we don't just do a 3 or 4 day resolution to keep it open. I'd support that. I can't speak for everybody, but I think that would have pretty broad support. I don't know why Congress feels they have to make other people suffer and hurt American security just to have a negotiation. It's a very dysfunctional way to operate, and it's a discretionary way to operate. Speaker Ryan can end that now by bringing a 3 or 4 day extension here, would probably pass the Senate too, or allowing my open rule for the DREAM Act, just to, what else are we doing? I mean, let's hash it out on the floor. If there's a version of it with amendments that gets a majority, that's great. That'll then pass, and it'll be back in the Senate's court. But at least we'll have done something, rather than just adjourn at 5 p.m. or something, and go home, and members are just hanging out. So let's get to work. My amendment would do that. I would support anybody else who offered an amendment for a 3 or 4 day extension so that any remaining differences could be hashed out while government was open instead of while government's closed. But in the meantime, I'm going to continue discussions with my colleagues, Democratic and Republican, to figure out a path forward to reopen government and deal with the pending issues in the bill, which by all accounts are not major. That's the frustrating part. They're not major issues that are irreconcilable that are keeping Republicans and Democrats apart here. I think the framework's largely been worked out, from my understanding, and we've all seen potential compromises. You may be for it or against it, but it's the type of language that I think would get 60, 70% of the House voting for it, most of the Senate voting for it. You can't please everybody. But that's not the goal. The goal is to have a good bipartisan long-term spending plan rather than live month to month with this enormous uncertainty hanging over every American family, including our service members. So I will, again, in a few moments, when we're done with the debate, move to allow for open debate for several hours on the DREAM Act. Republicans and Democrats can offer amendments. If somebody else would like to offer a 3 or 4 day continuing resolution, I would support that. Can't speak for all my colleagues, but that would at least allow the rest of the negotiations to occur while government was open instead of while government is closed. And with that, I will yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas recognized again.
Thanks, Chairman, for letting me reclaim my time. I did, too, want to bring up the efficacy of the flu shot was addressed a few moments ago in part of this discussion. So I know the eyes of the nation are probably on the Rules Committee this morning because everyone's always interested in what we do. True enough, the flu shot may not be as effective as we would all like, but I think it's more effective than what people are assuming. The difficulty, of course, is having to grow the virus in eggs, and in this flu season, the virus mutated while it was being grown for the vaccine, which was an unfortunate occurrence. So it wasn't as potent as was planned. But I do not think, as we sit here in the midst of this flu epidemic with the number of deaths that we had, I would not want anyone to have the idea that a flu shot is not a good idea. It is a good idea. Even if it's not 100% effective, it can ameliorate the course of the disease and make it not as severe. Also, just on the issue of, it was brought up that perhaps we should be doing something about pensions. And while I may not disagree with that, it is kind of startling what has happened as people talk to me about what they've viewed in their own personal situations with IRAs and 401ks over the past 12 months' time. And certainly the return on investment has been significant over the last 12 months, and that, as everyone in this dais knows, can buy you out of a significant amount of pension difficulty if the market is performing. So I frankly do not understand why we would do anything that would potentially jeopardize that. And yes, it does seem like an appropriations lapse that we find ourselves in now does run the risk. The markets are not open today, but it does run the risk of having an effect on the market. And I think that is something that people should bear in mind before this is continued for too many days. To the statement that elections are being meddled with, there, of course, as anyone who's watched the news cycle over the last 24, 48 hours knows, there is a memo prepared by the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence that is available to members of Congress to look at, and I know many members have looked at that. I encourage people to look at that because it does detail some of the concerns about what might have happened as our election was meddled with. So that is not something that is suspended while we are here in this appropriations lapse. In fact, my understanding is the good people at the House Intelligence Committee are down there and on the job and would be willing to talk to any member who wants to view the memo that was prepared and discussed in great detail on the news shows last week. And then finally, as reference to the crisis with opiates, and obviously this is going to be an ongoing problem with which this country is going to deal for a number of years. It's a multifactorial problem. The response is multifactorial. But once again, I would suggest that one of the difficulties that may lead someone in that direction in their lives is a chronic state of unemployment. And the beneficial effect that the economy has felt the last 12 months, my opinion, that will bring people back from a non-working to a working situation will be, ultimately, that is one of the things that is going to be one of the tools that is used in battling the opiate crisis. Not to say that money's not important, of course money is important, but the overall employability and the dignity of work that people experience when they are employed, my opinion, will keep people from, potentially keep people from entering into that problem. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the whole issue of, can we work together? Why has there not been more working together? And I do hear that a lot. I mean, I hear it from constituents back home, and the question I always ask in follow-up to that is, if we did, would you notice, or would you pay attention, or would you care? Because there are a number of instances where, certainly on the committee, the other committee that I sit on, the Energy and Commerce Committee, where there has been a significant amount of bipartisan work. I'd reference the Food and Drug Administration Reauthorization Act. We had a number of hearings. They were bipartisan hearings. We heard witnesses that were called by Republicans, witnesses that were called by Democrats, witnesses that were called by agreement between both sides. There is a 5-year window on reauthorization of the Food and Drug Administration. Comes up every 5 years. It's no surprise, as As this Congress was gavelled in for the first time a year ago, everyone knew that at the end of the fiscal year, the Food and Drug Administration was no longer going to be under an active authorization. And unlike other programs, when we fail to reauthorize and say, it's like, say for the highway authorization or the Education Act, sometimes we just say the dog ate my homework. We allow appropriators to appropriate even though the legislation has not been reauthorized. But the Food and Drug Administration is different because there are user fees that are paid by organizations that are outside the agency, and without those user fees, the Food and Drug Administration budget is sharply curtailed, and as a consequence, not doing your work on the Food and Drug Administration Reauthorization Act means that in the middle of the month of August, layoff notices are going to have to go out to the employees at that in that agency, and obviously that would be a very disruptive event were that to occur. It did not occur. That's why you didn't read about it. It did not happen. The product was delivered on time. The president signed it during the August recess. There wasn't a lot of fanfare. There wasn't a lot of headlines or press releases, but it did get reauthorized in plenty of time, and I would stress it was part of a bipartisan effort. Now, one of the other things that a year ago, as the committee was organized, the Energy and Commerce Committee was organized and gavelled in, the Health Subcommittee, we all knew the children's health insurance was only funded until the end of fiscal year 2016 and 2017, and on September 30th it was going to expire. It was going to be up. That was not a mystery. It was something that certainly we planned for, and we held the hearings. In fact, people have heard me reference it before. One of those hearings famously was the witnesses had come to town. We were ready to have the hearing. There was that tragedy that occurred on a practice field at a baseball game. Congress, as you remember, just came to a complete halt that day because of the shock and the tragedy and the dismay and the worry about one of our members who was in very difficult surgery that day. So we suspended the hearing, but we agreed with the witnesses that they would come back to town in 2 weeks' time, and indeed they did. And then we had a very good hearing, a bipartisan hearing. There were good questions from both sides of the dais there in the Energy and Commerce Committee. I'll just confess to you, as we started this term, I wanted a two-year authorization on children's health insurance. I thought that would be appropriate, as many of us will remember. The children's health insurance authorization that expired the end of September had occurred under the Affordable Care Act. It was a 10-year authorization, but only funded for 5 years. So at the end of September in 2015, there was a 2-year funding bill that was attached to a Medicare reform bill. And as we came up to September 30th this year, everyone recognized that was going to be up. My thought was that we would fund it for the last 2 years for which it had been authorized under the Affordable Care Act, and then the committee really get to work and really be serious about what do we want the Children's Health Insurance Program to look like going forward. It is currently a block grant to states. States are given a great deal of flexibility. States have done different things with their CHIP money. Perhaps it's time to do the evaluation, sit down, have the discussions. Where is it working well? Where could it work better? And is there anything we could do as a committee as we go through the reauthorization to make this a better program for our citizens? I did not win that argument. I lost it. Committee Democrats wanted a 5-year bill. My counterparts on the Senate Finance Committee, both Republicans and Democrats, wanted a 5-year bill. And in fact, the Senate Finance Committee marked up a 5-year bill in September of last year. So I had to compromise. I compromised with a 5-year bill that we worked on in the committee. At the request of committee Democrats, we did not bring that bill to the subcommittee before the end of September because the ranking member of the full committee said, I need more time to work on this. So we postponed it. There was an agreement with the ranking member of the full committee that perhaps we would not have to go through the subcommittee markup and could just go straight to full committee markup. But again, more time is needed to work on this, and so we delayed it. We did not mark the Children's Health Insurance Bill up until after September 30th, something that I regret because We all knew that drop dead date was there. But it passed out of committee unfortunately, on a party line vote the first week in October. The reason it devolved to a party lines vote was because part of my agreeing to a 5-year bill was that we must seriously attempt to offset the bill, and we did. And the offsets, I thought, were responsible. They were serious. They were not smoke and mirrors. I know some people on this committee objected to the use of the prevention fund, but I will just point out we used the prevention fund in passing the Cures bill in December of 2016. So this is not something that's unusual or foreign. And the CHIP bill got 24 Democratic votes on the floor of the House. It was not brought up in the Senate because there was not an agreement to have 60 votes to cut off debate, and that's a shame. Now, funny things happen up here, and the delay actually may have provided a little bit of benefit because the Congressional Budget Office says, you know what, if you extend this up to 6 years, not only does it not cost anything at all, so you don't need any offsets, so perhaps that argument is now gone, and it will return a little money to the Treasury. So that is the bill that was used, and the vehicle by which it was going to be, we'd already passed a CHIP bill, the vehicle that was going to be used was to attach it to the continuing resolution. It seemed like a responsible thing to do. And I frankly do not understand voting against that just because we didn't like CHIP. So that is one of the things that our senators, and it was a bipartisan opposition to the cloture vote yesterday in the Senate, that is one of the things that our senators voted against. And again, this is not something that was dropped de novo at the last minute. This is something that's been in the cycle, been in process the entirety of last year, calendar year 2017. Mr. Chairman, you've been very generous with the time. I'm going to yield back. I just once again want to observe that in times of crisis in this institution, it is always the Rules Committee that stands in the lead and people look to for the leadership that is provided by the Rules Committee. And Mr. Chairman, most of that is your leadership. So thank you, and I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. I would also add that on the Democratic side, the members there too represent their party, as is evidence of Mr. McGovern, who brings on a regular basis his wisdom and insight from the Agriculture Commissioner on some very, very important issues that we not only discuss but need to have regular comment from. The gentleman from Georgia, a member of the Republican leadership, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's been said very well. I think we're in the middle of a choice. The choice has been made. The Senate now, Mr. Schumer, has to decide what he wants to do. We'll continue to look at that. And, I think there's plenty of discussion to go around here, but when you're making choices that have been made, we've seen it been made, I stand with what we have talked about. Again, when you make the choice to put funding of priorities, if broken down and given probably to anybody on both sides of the aisle they would agree with, but choosing to take that and add in a completely separate issue such as the DACA situation is the very choice on why we're here right now. I'll continue to wait for Mr. Schumer to do the right thing, and with that, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I also want to thank the gentleman for his confidence, as he has told me he will stay here to make sure the work that's needed to be done at the Rules Committee. And I know this is a hardship on families. Today is my son's 24th birthday that I'm going to miss, and I called Alex yesterday and told him I had to do it, and he said, "Dad, get your work done." I said, "Yes, sir." That's from a beautiful Down syndrome young man who tries to pay attention and who has confidence of the things we try and touch. By the way, he works at Home Depot. He goes to work, and he wanted to make sure his work was okay. And I said, "Yeah, Alex, it's just the government." He kind of saw that people aren't going to work. He said, "Dad, my job's important." I said, "Alex, you can go to work."
Can I reclaim it, or
yes, sir.
because you brought up something interesting, and in the midst of this, I think it really goes back to, look, I have vast disagreements with my friends across the aisle on this issue. I think it's wrong. I think where we're at is very much of a disappointment and a failure across the board. But what you just brought up about children and our families, I think is something we often fail to sometimes separate our political discourse from the fact of the folks that we serve most and first and foremost is those folks that are in the same home or have left the home of their birth. And you mentioned your son, and I have my daughter who, as well has spina bifida. She gets up, she rolls. We take her, she works at the hospital. And, every day I get that text. And I think that's a reminder for all of us around here, is we're going to have political disagreements, and I'll be as passionate as my friend from Florida and my friend from New York is. But at the end of the day, we're all, passionate about what we have. And it's also a reminder of why we need to get this done and stop, where we're at right now. So with that, I just wanted to chime in on that.
I appreciate it. I think Alex values his job, and I hope every government employee does also. And my son is out in Pearl Harbor in the United States Navy, and he views what he does as important too, and that our children find meaning and purpose in work. And I think sending them home is a bad sign too. The distinguished gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a sad day for the country that we're here in the Schumer shutdown. Some people I don't think understand what that vote was last night. It's not a vote by the President of the United States. He asked us to pass the continuing resolution. This House passed it, sent it to the Senate. The Senate's vote last night was on a motion to proceed, that is, to go to the vote. And Senator Schumer led the Democrats in blocking an effort to get to the vote on the bill. And it is the Schumer shutdown. His hometown newspaper, the New York Times, didn't say it was the Trump shutdown. They said it was the Senate Democrats. That's the headline of the New York Times, Senator Schumer's hometown newspaper. Now, I was not here the last time there was a shutdown, and I'm learning how these work because I wasn't here. I got to say that I appreciate the way that the President and the Director of the Office of Management and Budget are handling things. They're trying to keep the pain down as much as they can, which I'm told is completely different from the way it was last time when President Obama tried to make it as painful as he possibly could. So I want to congratulate the President and Mr. Mulvaney, one of our former colleagues, for how they're handling that. There are some things they can't do anything about. After February 1st, the servicemen and women of the United States of America will not be drawing pay. They'll still be deployed if they are deployed now, around the world, defending you and me. And I think that is very wrong. And I'm sad to hear that that's even a possibility. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to get somewhere where we can make sure that doesn't happen. Now, there's some other important things about this bill. I'm from Alabama, as you all know. The CHIP program is very important to Alabama. I was on the state school board when it was first put into place, and we were able to lift a lot of poor children out of being in a position where they didn't have health care. And now they have health care, 150,000 of them. And this bill will continue that health care for them for 6 years. Extremely important. And I heard you, Judge Hastings, very well. You care about people, and I think we all do. But I got to say, I was disappointed to hear the minority leader refer to those benefits to the children in Alabama and across the country as doggy-do. It's not doggy-do. It's critically important to the quality of their lives. And I can't imagine why somebody would say something like that. I hope she'll think twice about that, retract it, and apologize, because that's the right thing for her to do. Now, I know what else is left in this debate. I know that the Democrats want us to get to some sort of an agreement on some immigration issues. The President has asked all of us to participate in a good faith dialogue and negotiation about that. I'm not in the room where the groups are meeting, but from everything I hear, that is occurring. There's some difficult, thorny, complex issues there. I'm still learning about some of them, by the way. And it takes time to get those resolved. And I think from my own experience in negotiating tough things, both in and out of public life, you got to give it the time. If you try to rush things, things don't get where they need to go, and things usually blow up and you don't get anything. And so we need to be patient and let that process work. The President asked all of us to go into it in good faith and seriously. I'm going to do that. I intend to be very serious and to act in good faith. Now, I think some of my colleagues on the other side know that about me, because over the last few months, I've been working with Ms. Spear, Mr. Brady, Mr. Deutsch to come up with this bill that we filed this week, a totally bipartisan bill that changes the laws as they apply to us in Congress on harassment. I was very pleased to see that work product, and I got to tell you, I enjoyed every bit of the time that we spent working on that, because it's exactly the way Congress is supposed to work. People, smart people that care about the issue and care about the country, sat down and worked very hard together. But I got to tell you, that also was a complex issue. It took us 3 months to get it worked out. Not because we disagree, but there are things you just have to work through. And I think because we took the time, we didn't set artificial deadlines for ourselves, we got a really good bill, and you can see the way it's being received by the press and the public very positively. In fact, we're leading the country on that issue in the middle of this Me Too debate. So I'm very proud of that. I believe that we can have that same sort of process as we go through the immigration issue. And I think we should do our job about funding the government so we can get back to those negotiations.
When the gentleman finishes, would you yield?
I'd be happy to yield.
When you
to
finish.
Judge, go ahead. I'll go ahead and yield to you now.
I just wanted to correct you on your initial assertion. The Senate voted 97-2 to proceed, and then cloture was where all the disagreement occurred. But I did want to ask you,
Yes, sir.
how do you respond to the fact that Senator McConnell objected to Senator McCaskill's request to have the troops' salaries provided to them during any shutdown?
Thank you, and I'll take my time back. And you're right, it was not the motion to proceed, it was a cloture vote, which a cloture vote allows you to get to the bill too. You have to have the cloture. If you don't have the cloture vote, you can't get to the bill, so functionally it's the same thing. I have no idea what happened last night with Senator McConnell. I don't know, and I can't respond to it because I'm not him and I don't know what happened. All I know is, I have my time, Judge.
I just asked you to yield so that I could tell you what he did.
Yes, sir, I heard what he did, but I
All
don't
right.
know why he did it under the circumstances, so I can't respond to that, and I'm not going to try to put myself in his place and guess. But I'm telling you, I think we need to get the pay to these soldiers and airmen and sailors after February the 1st, and I'm willing to do what needs to be done about that. The best way to do that is to get the funding bill done. That's the simplest, quickest way to get to it. And the Senate can do that right now. The Senate can do that right now, and the reason we're here is to make sure that we have the rule in place so that when they do it right then, we can take it up right then and get it done and keep the government funded. I think it's a smart thing to keep our process open and not cloud it with other issues or other bills out there, so the moment it's done, we come back here and make sure we get the people's business done. I've not only been in this House for 4 years, and there have been times when I've been disappointed before, but I got to say I'm most disappointed since I've been in the House right at this very moment. And I hope that we can find a way quickly, or the Senate can find a way quickly to do something about this. But this is in the hands of Senator Schumer. It's not in the hands of President Trump. It's not in the hands of the House. It's in Senator Schumer's hands, and I hope he will stop his shutdown. We'll reopen the government. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back his time. I think I would answer the gentleman without knowing the entire context, is that the way I've heard it is that notwithstanding what the CR request had, but that as long as, or I guess the remainder of the fiscal year, that Ms. McCaskill was saying to fund the military pay. Is that what it was? Because we had a CR to go through a date of February. She was amending. I'm trying to figure out enough about it to know how to respond to you. And while I was up here till 1:15 in the morning watching them, I did not see that. Was that to say, in the CR, we would fund the members of the military until an agreement was made?
No, this was after the time period for the shutdown, and they were in discussions on amendments. Mr. Tester from Montana
So they're trying to
offered an
amend.
amendment, and she was offering a 3-day CR to include in that the pay for the military going forward until such time as any shutdown.
So through the end of the year, the fiscal
Yes.
year? Okay.
Right, but if, for example, you may see that again, and it'll be interested to
Yes.
see what you all are going to say
Well, I'll
about
tell you how we
military
will
pay.
fund the military, not just people's pay.
Yeah,
And that is our position, fund the military, not
and
just.
that was her position in her amendment that Senator
Oh, is fund the
McConnell-
military? I thought you said their
was
pay.
fund the military.
Fund the military,
And
okay.
that was,
Well, I would predict you,
excuse me.
Yes, sir.
That was what Senator McConnell did object to, that she put forward.
and I'll be glad to check that, but I would, that's what we've been trying to get to, so I appreciate the gentleman's offer of this information. The distinguished gentleman from Sunnyside, Washington, Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to add some to this discussion, I'd like to yield some time to Mr. Byrne to respond to.
So as usual, you got to have the whole story. When you don't get the whole story, you don't get the truth. What I'm told Senator McConnell said was, I object, but I will work with the gentlelady to get this resolved today being Saturday. So it sounds like they are working to resolve this issue today, and Senator McConnell is doing that in good faith. Procedurally, it was not the appropriate time to do it. So now that we have the whole story, I think we can put that issue aside.
So if the gentleman would yield,
I'll yield back to the gentleman whose time it is if he wants.
so I asked the gentleman to yield.
Further discussion? Absolutely, Judge.
So will you support pay for the military and death benefits as Ms. McCaskill was seeking?
I assume that once they get it worked out, somehow it's going to get back over here, and of course it will.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see. Thank the gentleman for you.
You're welcome, Mr. Hastings. Always want to further a productive discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate everybody's comments this afternoon on this situation we find ourselves in. That I got to tell you, I agree with the gentleman from Alabama. This is a very disappointing day. This will be the first shutdown that I've lived through as a member of Congress, certainly lived through them as a American citizen and the impacts they have on the people that we represent. And I think that's what we should be keeping in mind here. Let me just say right off the top, I do not like CRs. I think continuing resolutions are a bad way to run government. But I got to tell you that as bad as they are, what's even worse than a continuing resolution is completely shutting down the government. To me, that is an irresponsible move, no matter which party decides that that's the necessary move. Mr. Cole said something about the results are never good. You never get the product that you're striving for through that mechanism. And I would agree that this will probably play out the same way. I also agree with Mr. Hastings. This is a blame game that's going on right now, not just here in the halls of Congress, but throughout the country. Some of the newspaper headlines that were quoted this morning, I suppose you can find them on both sides. Polls that I've seen, the American people, and that's the opinion that counts, the majority seem to say that the blame, most of the blame for this should fall on those Senate Democrats. And using the rules of the Senate, the 60-vote majority necessary to move a piece of legislation that was voted on last night, the minority has a lot of power, and they exercised it last night, taking the option of shutting down the government. And so if it's a blame game, I think it's just calling it what it is. If this is, it's certainly not, the president didn't have a vote in this, so calling it a Trump shutdown to me seems pretty far-fetched. If Mr. Schumer's the leader of the Senate Democrats, that seems to me that's where that responsibility lies. But like I said, I think this is a terrible option, just more terrible than the CR that we were voting on. What we really need now, in my humble opinion, are calm, reasonable, deliberate people to work through these issues, important issues that face the American public. And I think, I see heads shaking, I think that there's an agreement in that. We have a lot of serious questions. Many of these were addressed in this CR. Continuing the funding of the government with 2017 appropriation levels, like I said, isn't good, but at least it keeps things moving, keeps the federal government in a position to be able to respond to the needs of the citizenry. And that's an important obligation that we have. So in the end, I'm concerned. I certainly am. I'm concerned for those people that defend our nation, stationed all over the world right now. The potential of them doing so basically on their own time concerns me a lot. I'm concerned for those mothers and children who depend on the CHIP program. I think 9 million in this country, 60,000 in the state of Washington, which, like several other states, has run out of money, that are desperately in need of this program. I'm concerned for, the military is one thing, but part of this funding for national defense goes to what in my district is very important work, and that's cleaning up nuclear defense waste at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. Jeopardizing that, setting the work back, slowing that down as a shutdown will eventually do is very concerning, as well as the important work that's happening at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory and other national laboratories around the country. We're jeopardizing our ability as a nation to benefit from that important work as well. And the list goes on and on and on as to why I think a shutdown is a very poor way to run a government. So I'm disappointed in my Senate colleagues across the rotunda that they decided to take this action. I agree that negotiations need to happen, but they should not be happening while the government is shut down. I think Mr. Polis made that point as well. So I think there's a lot of agreement on both sides of the aisle here. We should be able to keep the government open and keep doing our work, and that's where we need to be. And like I said, cool heads need to prevail here. Reasonable people need to be stepping up and finding deep inside themselves to address these issues and solve these important questions. And I think we need to do that as soon as possible. And so, like I said, I'm disappointed, I'm concerned, and I just hope that we can find it in all of us to get this put behind us as soon as possible so we can get on with the work of the country and the responsibility that we have to the people that elected all of us. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Appreciate the gentleman's comments. Excuse me. Yes, sir.
You for your unanimous consent request?
Without objection.
Yeah, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record an article that just appeared in the Hill entitled "Former RNC Chair, This Shutdown rests at the Feet of the GOP."
I would ask that the gentleman, without objection, that'll be entered the record, but I'd ask that the gentleman provide a copy to all the members that are here on the dais so that they would have an opportunity to see that.
What was the title of that again?
The title is "Former RNC Chair, colon, in quotes, this shutdown rests at the feet of the GOP," end quote.
I thank the gentleman for bringing that to my attention. I'm well aware that the gentleman, Mr. Polis, is here. I intended to engage for just a second the gentleman, Judge Hastings, so pending his return, I wanted to clarify, and I will do that, but I'll offer this, that so that we're not mistaken about what happened on the floor last night in the United States Senate. It is true that Ms. McCaskill did offer an amendment that was for paying for pay and death benefits for members of the armed services. So to answer Judge Hastings, and I'll do this when he's back where he has a chance to respond, the GOP answer is, why not fund the military? To say we'll pay the members of the armed services is one thing, but to not give them the necessary resources to prevent their possible injury or possible incident that could happen without the ability to protect himself. Pay and death benefits are great, and I respect that. But I would have hoped that we perhaps would have said, could we get unanimous consent to fund the military? And that is what I think you will see the House do. Thank you very much. I'll engage Judge Hastings when he comes back. The gentleman from Colorado, excuse me just a second,
Yeah,
please.
I think the record should reflect exactly what McConnell
Okay.
said.
Okay, so I have a copy, and I'd
Yeah.
ask unanimous consent to put that in the record,
Yeah, he's-
and I will provide a copy to each
But
person.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, we passed similar legislation during the government shutdown back in 2013. My hope is that we can restore funding for the entire government before this becomes necessary. I'm going to object for tonight, but we'll discuss again tomorrow.
In fact, that would be correct. He was for funding the entire government.
Yeah, so we've done this before. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make.
Well, in fact, we did. I remember when we did it, and we did it way early on in the process, and we did it before the government was shut down to make sure that those members, if we're asking somebody to go to work, you ought to pay them, but perhaps more importantly, we're then and are now where people need to know that they've got that paycheck coming in. There are lots of families that are on the home side that need to make sure they get that. So while it's not a bad idea, my point is, he asked the question, what's wrong with that? And I said, I'm saying, I think the Republican answer is, why don't you fund the military? The gentleman from Colorado. No, sir, this is first round.
This is what?
Did you already go earlier? I'm
I
sorry.
did,
I was
yeah.
downstairs voting.
I
That is
just-
my fault.
I basically said we should.
But the
stop
gentleman's
Trump
recognized.
shutdown. Stop the Trump shutdown and reopen government.
I appreciate the gentleman's comments. I'm sorry, I was downstairs voting evidently when the gentleman spoke. Thank you very much. The distinguished gentlewoman from the great state that we know not only of her forefathers, but what she believes in, the gentleman from Wyoming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm also sorry that Judge Hastings has left, because listening to Judge Hastings talk about the impact of this shutdown and say things like the military will be, quote, just fine, I found to be frankly indefensible. And I know our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are having a very difficult time in terms of figuring out exactly how they're messaging this. And it began yesterday on the floor with my colleague, whom I respect very much, the Minority Whip, Mr. Hoyer, who stood up and urged us to stay here and continue our work, and then offered a motion to adjourn, which I think made everybody's head spin. When I hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle go through the list of terrible things that are happening because of this shutdown, I agree with them, and it is in their hands. They need to get Senator Schumer and the Democrats over in the Senate to come on board and end this shutdown. Calling it the Trump shutdown is a nice try, but as my colleague from Alabama, Mr. Byrne, pointed out, the president didn't vote to shut anything down. It was the Democrats in the Senate. And I'm glad, Mr. Hastings, that you've come back, because I didn't want to go through the problems in some of the comments while you weren't here. And I know very much that my colleague from Florida supports our military. I believe he feels very strongly about it. But I just wanted to put some facts into the record, Mr. Chairman. During this shutdown, to say, quote, our military is just fine, is simply completely inaccurate. During this shutdown, no death benefits to any family members of those killed in the line of duty will be paid. During this shutdown, all of our troops will continue to have to stand on the front line defending us, and they will not be paid. During this shutdown, weapons maintenance operations will stop. During this shutdown, there will be a huge disruption in the Department of Defense workforce, and that could, in fact, begin to impact key military missions in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. So the notion that it's somehow fine, or that we can somehow be flippant about the fact that we can't do our job up here, and then we're going to say the military will be, quote, just fine, while we're asking them to put their lives on the lines, is what I think is shameful, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we had a hearing on Thursday in the Armed Services Committee about the tragedies of the McCain and the USS Fitzgerald. Testifying in front of us, we had the Chief of Naval Operations and the Secretary of the Navy. And when asked, what can Congress do? They said the, quote, single most important thing the United States Congress can do to help us prevent future accidents, to help us return to the kind of military we need to defend us, is to provide stable and sufficient funding. We have not done that for 9 years, operating under the Obama budgets, operating under CRs, operating under the Budget Control Act. We've strangled our military for 9 years, Mr. Chairman. And that's just the damage that's done when we're operating under a CR. Now, we knew over the last few days, we warned, those of us on this side of the aisle, we warned that the Democrats were holding hostage, even when we had Leader Pelosi here speaking before us. And it was my colleague, Mr. Woodall, who asked her, wait a minute, you are going to hold hostage the funding for our military over illegal immigration. And she absolutely denied it, because on your side of the aisle, you don't want to have to accept that, with all due respect to my colleagues. But that is where we have now come today. Senator Schumer has made a decision that he would rather manufacture a crisis. We all know there is no real DACA deadline. We know that. But Senator Schumer would rather manufacture that crisis than fund the military. So again, with all due respect, when I hear things like, well, Senator McCaskill said this, or, you know, the military is going to be just fine, there's a simple solution here. And that is end this shutdown, fund the military, and let's get back to the business that we need to be in. So we have done huge damage operating under a CR, and the idea that we somehow now, you know, we're going to be just fine, that frankly is what I find indefensible and shameful. And let me just end by saying that we're in a situation today where we in this body are harming our military. We in this body are making it much harder for them to do their job. We are increasing the risk that they face, and we are helping our adversaries. And that's what we're doing when we're operating without a clear budget, without appropriations. We are now in a shutdown. The damage is much, much worse. And I would point out that we passed all of our appropriations bills through this House. So once again, I think that there's a lot of political spin that's going on about whose fault this is. But we passed our appropriation bills. We are in a position where all that has to happen is for the Senate to take up those appropriations bills, and for people to be playing politics over the issue of our troops or pretending that there is somehow no damage, it's somehow not a big deal for us to be in a shutdown, is totally unjustified based on the facts, and I think represents
When the gentlelady finishes, would you yield?
I might. And I think represents a complete dereliction of duty and responsibility in terms of what we are called upon to do. Now, I will yield, Mr. Hastings.
Thanks a lot. I think the gentlelady, I was not in the room, I had stepped out to the restroom, I might add, during that period of time, saw a portion of Senator Schumer's press conference where he said negotiating with President Trump is like negotiating with Jell-O. But Ms. Cheney, what I referenced was what the Secretary of Defense said, and I wish to put all of it in the record at this time. The subject was guidance on the government shutdown. Our government will shut down at midnight tonight. We in the Department of Defense will continue carrying our fundamental responsibility to defend our nation and the American people. We will continue to execute daily operations around the world. Ships and submarines will remain at sea, our aircraft will continue to fly, and our warfighters will continue to pursue terrorists throughout the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia.
I'd like to reclaim my time. Mr. Hastings, you're surely not arguing, as you did, and maybe you just meant not to say it, maybe you'd like to correct it now. When our Secretary of Defense says that our military will continue to defend us, I don't think anybody here questions that. The question is whether or not we in this body will do our job and provide the resources they need. The list of things that I read to you, I'm not sure if you were in the room, so perhaps I'll read it again. During a shutdown, and this is a fact sheet provided by the Armed Services Committee from the Department of Defense, there will be no death benefits. paid to any family members of those killed in the line of duty. During a shutdown, all of our troops will continue to work. What the Secretary of Defense said is right, but they won't be paid. Now, I know, Mr. Hastings, that you understand what it means when we ask somebody who is 19, 20, 21 years old to put their lives on the line for all of us. And then we say to them, but you know what, you're not going to be able to pay your bills because your salary will not be there in the direct deposit that you count on every 2 weeks. That is unconscionable in my view. So I think it's important for us as we look at the kinds of things, the impact that we're putting on the department right now, their inability to do weapons maintenance, the kind of planning that they've got to go through because of the shutdown, that means that our actual military operations are going to be impacted. All of those things, that's not damage our adversaries are doing. That's damage that we're doing to the military. And that's damage that Senator Schumer and the Democrats in the Senate can stop right now. And they need to stop it right now so that we can begin to get back to work in order to make sure that we aren't putting an unbelievable additional burden on our men and women in uniform.
Yield?
Yes,
I think you misunderstood me.
I hope so.
Yeah, first, I had queried our friend from Alabama regarding Senator McCaskill's request that death benefits and military pay be continued, and that Senator McConnell objected to it, and then he brought forward that Senator McConnell said that they would take care of that today. Additionally, I wish to tell you that in previous shutdowns, the death benefits and military pay were continued, but this particular CR did not include that.
Reclaiming my time now, Mr. Hastings. Before you said that, and before you came back into the room, I was talking about the sort of head-spinning changes in position that we've seen from folks on your side of the aisle. And the first was what we had to watch the minority whip do yesterday when he asked that we all stay here to work and then move to adjourn. The second is that we are listening to folks on your side of the aisle talk about the damage of a shutdown when we agree, and we can end it tomorrow. But then also, Mr. Hastings, you began your remarks talking about, well, the military will be just fine. Stop saying the military will be hurt. And then we got off onto the conversation about Senator McConnell and Senator McCaskill. And there's a very easy solution. There are several easy solutions. One is to support the Defense Appropriations Bill. To support the Defense Appropriations Bill that we already passed through this House once. That's the most important thing that the Senate can take up tomorrow. And another is let's approve the CR so that we are no longer in shutdown. And if Senator McCaskill is so concerned about our members of the military, then I would urge that she and her colleagues on the other side of this body, on the other side of this building, move to reopen this government and stop the shutdown. But at a minimum, if we're going to be in the business of playing games, and I have to just recommend anybody who hasn't had this experience, find a child, find somebody who's 10, 11, 12, and try to explain to them exactly what's happening up here. Why is the government not being funded? But if we are going to be in a position where we're arguing over whether we're going to open the government up or not, it is totally unconscionable that we pretend we aren't harming our troops, because we are every single moment that this government is shut down. And so I would urge my colleagues, no, I will not yield again. I apologize, Mr. Hastings. I think that your position's been clear. But we need to move to reopen this government, and we need to move to do it immediately.
Mr. Chairman?
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida, do you seek time?
I do.
The gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I wish to make Ms. Cheney understand that, like you, I have continuing concerns for the military. And one of the reasons that many of us are concerned is by continuing to do continuing resolutions, we learn from the military, not just from our own undertakings, that causes them not to have the stable, necessary undertakings that would be provided if we were to do a full year and undertaking. There was a lady that came to the Senate that talked about the fact that they've been operating under 3 years of CRs. She was a spokesperson for the Defense Department, and that it is doing considerable harm. Ms. Cheney, I've been all over this world, just as you have, and I served on the Intelligence Committee in this Congress for 8 years, over a period of 10 years. I've been on military bases just like you have. I have troops at my home just like you have. And you don't care any more about the military than I do, and I find it just as offensive as you did when I characterized Secretary Mathis's comments on allowing, among other things, that we will take care of the troops. And I believe Senator Senator McConnell, when he says he'll deal with Senator McCaskill today. And I hope that he does, so that the military pay and the death benefits will be continued. And I believe that they will be fine. And that's exactly how I feel. But I say to you, for example, in defense of Senator McCaskill, she voted to keep the government open. And I say to you that no less an authority and a person concerned about the military voted oppositely, Lindsey Graham, on last night. So don't come here with the fact that you care anymore or feel anymore about the military. And what I also said in my comments was every man and woman on this dais and in this Congress is concerned about the military, period. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time.
Mr. Chairman,
Does the gentlewoman seek time?
I do. Thank you very much.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Judge Hastings, I think that, the decibel of the presentation is not something that is consistent with the seriousness of what we are discussing here. And you're right, CRs are incredibly damaging and dangerous to the military. And a solution to that would have been for you to support the defense appropriations bill that we passed through this House in July. We absolutely have got to get back to normal business. We've got to get back to a situation where we are providing stable and sufficient funding for our troops. Continuing resolutions don't do that. I know we all care about the troops, but I think it's important for us to operate on facts. And the fact is that a shutdown is far more damaging than a CR. A CR is inexcusable in and of itself, and we've got to end the shutdown. And we've got to get back to a position where we're not saying this is the Trump shutdown. The Democrats in the Senate have the ability today, right now, to change this. And in my view, Mr. Chairman, they ought to move to do that. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman for her time. Is there any other member that would seek time? Seeing none, we've now finished our opening statements here at the Rules Committee today, and I would ask the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma, the gentleman, Mr. Cole, for a motion on behalf of the committee.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule that waives Clause 6A of Rule 13, requiring a two-thirds vote to consider a rule on the same day it is reported from the Rules Committee against any resolution reported through the legislative day of January 29th, 2018. Section 2 of the rule provides that it shall be in order at any time through the legislative day of January 28th, 2018, for the Speaker to entertain motions that the House suspend the rules as though under Clause 1 of Rule 15, and that the Speaker or his designee shall consult with the minority leader or her designee on the designation of any matter for consideration pursuant to this section.
Now, I heard the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. Is there amendment or discussion to that? The gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the rule also provide for consideration of H.R. 3440, the DREAM Act, under an open rule with 3 hours of debate.
Thank you very much. Discussion?
If I can speak to that, Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman's recognized.
I think that, again, this is a productive way for us to spend our floor time versus just not being in the building, I guess, or going home or wherever people are going. I'm just suggesting we spend 3 hours hashing through what I know are very complicated issues that divide us and unite us in different ways. But I think that would be what the House should be doing. It's what the American people expect the House to do, rather than just go home, is to actually work in an open process towards addressing these pending issues. One of which, of course, is the self-imposed crisis that President Trump created when he set a March deadline for Dreamers. Over 100 Dreamers lose their status every day. I think there'll be a lot of good ideas from Democrats and Republicans, and I'm confident that we can reach a solid majority of this body. I think we can report out a bill that Democrats and Republicans feel very good about if we simply have the time and the open process to be able to do that on the floor. So I hope that my colleagues join me in scheduling this for consideration in an open process under this rule, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? I would simply tell the gentleman that the motion that's on the floor is simply to provide that we might move to the floor. It contains no specific legislation. It contains nothing that necessarily would be considered. It allows us to have that opportunity to go to the floor, and then the committee can come back at any time. So I would ask a no vote on the gentleman's amendment at this time. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just say again, because of this manufactured sense of urgency, I hope everybody on the panel knows that the courts have already ruled on this to say the Trump administration must continue to accept these renewals. The Trump administration is accepting these renewals as of last Saturday and is available on their website, the statement they issued to say we are continuing the DACA program as it was in existence before President Trump made his statement. Lots of things we continue to disagree on, but while we are entitled to our own opinions, we are not entitled to our own facts. It is not true that 120 children a day are losing their status under DACA unless they have just chosen not to file their renewal application, which is available to be filed today. And I don't want to minimize the importance of that discussion. I just want to minimize the perhaps a misrepresentation of where we are as we sit here as a body. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate
I would
the
urge a no
gentleman.
vote also.
Further discussion? Seeing none, the vote now be on the post amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no? No. Noes have it, noes have it.
Roll call, please.
The gentleman asks for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? No. Ms. Cheney? No. Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis?
Aye.
Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Florida, distinguished
Chairman, I
gentleman from
ask
Florida, Judge
two
Hastings.
unanimous consent requests. One, that the January 19th, 2018 letter of Secretary memorandum.
Without objection, that'll be
Department
entered the record. Thank you,
of
Judge.
Secretary of Defense
Yes, sir.
be included in the record. The second is so as how I can clarify for you and particularly for my friend Mr. Byrne. I ask unanimous consent that the statements of Senator McCaskill and McConnell be made a part of the record, and those statements read as follows. The senator from Missouri, unanimous consent request, H.R. 1301. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. President, this shouldn't take very long. I was most disappointed tonight when the President of the United States put out a statement that tried to divide us based on party when it came to support of our military. There is no such division. Everyone in this chamber knows it. So as we have in other instances where we have had a shutdown, I remember in 2013, we did this right off the bat. I want to make sure that tonight we send a very clear signal that we don't want one moment to pass with there being any uncertainty that any soldier anywhere in the world will be paid for the valiant work they do on behalf of our national security. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 36, H.R. 1301, that the amendment at the desk providing for continuing appropriations for pay and death benefits for members of the armed services be considered and agreed to. The bill, as amended, be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. The presiding officer, is there objection? And then Mr. McConnell said, Mr. President, reserving the right to object, we passed similar legislation during the government shutdown back in 2013. My hope is that we can restore funding for the entire government before this becomes necessary. I am going to object for tonight, but we will discuss it again tomorrow. Therefore, I object. I hope that helps in clarifying what did transpire in the other body with reference to the matter.
Thank you, Judge Hastings. And so you're aware, this was previously entered in the record, and we tried to get copies to everybody, which is then what you saw. I know the gentleman's down voting, so I appreciate this very, very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I want to appreciate my friend offering the full text of what was said. Now that we have the full text of what was said, I think we know the context is quite different from the way it was originally presented, and I appreciate having the whole facts. And I look forward to Senator McConnell getting it worked out today.
Thank you very much. Without objection, the gentleman's copy will be also entered in the record, and I appreciate the gentleman acknowledging as he read. Yes, sir.
Imply that my characterization was done with some deliberate intent to misinterpret what transpired. I had no hesitancy about correcting the record. I was sitting there when Senator McCaskill made her statement and when Senator McConnell made his. And for purposes of this record, so as how he clearly understands, I try my very level best not to make misstatements of fact. And I'm sorry that it was understood that way, and I'm glad that there is a printed record that can clarify it.
Yes, sir. Judge Hastings, if I might clarify, not trying to intervene in this, what? It was not clear to us, because we did not have the written copy, whether it referred to the entire military or just their pay and benefits. And you had asked for a clarification or for us to respond, and we felt cautious about responding to what we had not seen. At no point did the gentleman question you at all. We simply did not understand whether that included paying the military also. And I appreciate the gentleman very much. I hope the gentleman understands why I've tried to clarify that. Okay, we now have 2 additional letters that have been entered to the record. We now have an opportunity to amend. I would like to advise the committee that I am going to move back to the gentleman, distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma, for clarification that he would like to make concerning the motion. Does the gentleman seek time?
I do, Mr.
The
Chairman.
gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would ask unanimous consent for a technical change. In Section 2 of the motion is read in the first sentence, and I will reread the entire section for the record, but the word legislative day should have read calendar day, and for that, I apologize. So Section 2, as amended, would read, Section 2 of the rule provides that it shall be in order at any time through the calendar day of January 28, 2018, for the Speaker to entertain motions that the House suspend the rules as though under Clause 1 of Rule 15, and that the Speaker or his designee shall consult with the minority leader or her designee on the designation of any matter for consideration pursuant to this section.
Without objection, that will be considered as the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma that is before the committee. Is there further discussion or clarification that would be necessary? Seeing none, without objection, we have accepted that as the motion that would be read. And I appreciate the distinguished gentleman for that. We offered an opportunity for any clarification of the change of the word. Is there further discussion? Vote will now be on the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Accordingly, I will be handling this. The gentleman asked for a roll call vote. The clerk will please poll the committee on the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? Aye. Ms. Cheney? Aye. Ms. Slaughter? No. Ms. Slaughter? No. Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
Motion is agreed to, and accordingly, I will be handling this for Republicans. And the gentlewoman, Mrs. Slaughter, will be handling this for the minority. The question is always asked from the gentleman from Florida, and I will answer that question now. We're going to need to be flexible about us returning back at any time. I do consider that the committee, and Mrs. Slaughter is well aware of this, would make themselves available until such time as we have by agreement on the floor that we would adjourn. Thank the gentlewoman and the committee and our staff for the time this Saturday.